So about a month ago, we made a video talking about the complexities of running a game such as Doom on the Neo Geo. And this is because the Neo Geo does not have the concept of a frame buffer, which means that everything that you see on the screen on the Neo Geo is rendered as a sprite. And I also had initially talked about the concept of a raycaster style engine, which worked pretty well on the Neo Geo. And this concept that I had was essentially what we would do was build out a flat grid of blocks, and for every vertical column on the screen, we would cast out a single ray. And there was even an interesting attempt made by a developer known as Sabino, who made a Doom style game using that raycasting engine. Now, of course, a raycaster and a Doom style engine is not the same thing. A raycaster can only handle a grid, which is, square blocks, which means that everything has to be the same height and all the walls are at right angles. Doom, on the other hand, is more complicated. You can have walls that are on any angle, rooms at different floor heights, there are staircases, lifts, doors, sloped sightlines. Nothing like this fits on a raycasting style game. So even the attempt by Sabino, you could see here as you're turning the corner here, didn't really look very natural because ultimately we're talking about a grid of square blocks. So trying to build something out like E1M1, the hangar, simply is not really that feasible to do, right, with the raycasting approach. However, there has been some new updates to this Doom on the Neo Geo saga, and I'm very, very excited about where this is going because, as mentioned in the last video, the community has really stepped up to the plate to kind of just make things work. And for better or for worse, we've got some really cool new approaches to Doom running on the Neo Geo. Now, the first approach was to port Doom 64KB and use what is known as a sprite micro frame buffer. Now, this particular approach comes from a developer known as framebuffer, who developed a port known as Doom 64KB. Now, the interesting part about this approach is this is actually Doom. This is real BSP, real map geometry. This is E1M1, which is completely unmodified. And essentially, the developer has taken the genuine Doom rendering code and squeezed it down small enough to fit it on the Neo Geo. But how does this actually work? Because we did say that the Neo Geo has no concept of a frame buffer. So how does real Doom, built around writing pixels, plotting pixels into a frame buffer, run on a machine without a frame buffer? The Neo Geo has a text or fixed layer, and this is what we typically use, or what games typically use, to store things like the score displays and the HUD elements. Now, framebuffer has used the fixed layer as the tiny frame buffer. And this is something that some people left some comments in my original video, potentially to use or take a look at the fixed layer to make or to build a renderer on. Now, as you can see here, we're running E1M1, albeit at 38 by 28 chunky blocks. And this looks particularly blocky. However, it is running completely unmodified. This is Doom in its full glory. And the performance, as you can see here, is definitely not optimized, but it is running. And this is definitely an interesting way around the problem that we have running Doom on the Neo Geo. And it does work, right? But this is not the end of the story. There is another piece to this, and this is quite interesting. Now, Sabino, who worked on the NG Raycaster, or the Doom Raycaster, I should say, on the previous video that we talked about, has now built out what is known as a sprite micro frame buffer. And the whole concept of this is, instead of using the text or the fixed layer, the frame buffer is built out of sprites. So we take the Neo Geo sprite scaler, which is the same hardware scaler which was used in the Raycaster, and you shrink it all the way down to tiny 4x4 blocks. And then what he does is he tiles the whole screen with each of those little blocks. So each one of those 4x4 blocks is a single pixel, which means that we can now render Doom at 80 by 56, which is more than double the detail. Now suddenly this looks a lot more clearer and a lot more like Doom, and it's a lot less mosaic. But this does have the side effect of having a significant performance hit, as you can see here. Now, I ended up compiling this myself and applying Sabino's patch, and it does work. And this is definitely very interesting because there is probably room for optimizations, but furthermore, we did say that the Neo Geo AES Plus, when it releases later this year, hopefully it still is on track for releasing in November of 2026, has what is known as overclocking features. So I believe there are some overclocking features in the AES Plus, which means that something like Sabino's Sprite micro frame buffer could run pretty well on stock, albeit AES Plus hardware. Now, there's also a second port that I've been keeping tabs on, which has been developed by someone known as RetroPorts. Now, this second approach is known as DOOM NG. Now, this is an interesting approach because, as you can see here, it's clear as day. This is still using the sprite-based hardware. You can see these strips running down the screen as clear as day. Now, if we go back to the Raycaster that I built in the first video, the reason why it was quite fast is because that the CPU only was used for visibility, which means that it was only used to figure out how far you can see and how far away it is, and then everything else was handled by the hardware scaler. Now, the bad part of that approach, of course, is what we said previously, and that is it only uses a grid. It doesn't actually use real DOOM maps. So for DOOM NG, a new renderer has been developed known as vSlice, and it basically takes all the good parts of the raycastering approach and throws away all the bad stuff. It keeps the hardware scaler to draw all the pixels, so there's no frame buffer and there is no per pixel CPU work, just like the Raycaster. But instead of casting rays through the grid to decide what's visible, it walks through an actual DOOM BSP tree. And if you don't know what a BSP tree is, there are many different videos out there of explaining what that is. But just for a quick primer, the BSP tree is the data structure that basically builds out the map for you. It handles everything from arbitrary angles, it handles sectors at different heights, it handles occlusion, everything that a Raycaster can't. So when the CPU walks through real DOOM geometry front to back and works out what pieces of the wall that you can see and what you can't, this is what it actually does. And the vSlice renderer now will take real geometry from a DOOM map such as E1M1 and have free roam movement. You can walk and turn freely across real DOOM maps, and all 9 maps of Episode 1 are running completely stock on unmodified Neo Geo hardware. And although you can see these sprite strips walking down the screen, you can still see that this is DOOM running in its full glory. Now, this is obviously not flawless pixel perfect DOOM, and the developer doesn't pretend it is. There are real compromises here, as you can see, but they are also quite smart. The floor and ceilings aren't actually drawn. They're pre-baked lookup tables, and the far distance is deliberately faded into haze to hide where the detail runs out. The vertical texturing is snapped to 16 pixel chunks, and the frame rate, as you can see, is not locked. The engine watches how much is on screen, and then when there's a big wide open area that kind of slows everything down, it pulls back the draw distance and lets the haze cover it. Of course, this is a proof of concept. It's an engine that's being developed by clever optimizations that's been tuned by the eye, but the feel is there, and this is starting to look like a DOOM level where the hardware is doing all the work. So both of these approaches are still obviously nowhere near perfect, right? There's still various compromises and limitations of both. We have the DOOM 64KB Sprite Micro Frame Buffer, which is real DOOM with a real renderer. It does the job by brute force, but it works. And by faking a frame buffer out of sprites, it gets the job done, although you pay for it in speed, right? And then we have the vSlice renderer by RetroPorts, which kind of sits in the middle of both of these. You've got real DOOM geometry, but drawn in the way that the Neo Geo wants you to render by using scaled sprites. So it's never needing a frame buffer in the first place. And that's why I think we're slowly starting to get closer. Both of these approaches have very interesting use cases, and I'm not really suggesting one is better than the other. Both of them have interesting, ways to get the job done. But this, for me, is really the two projects that are the first serious attempts at running DOOM. One of them by shoving the real renderer through the hardware, whether it likes it or not, and the other by taking advantage of the hardware's sprite scaling. Now, neither one, of course, is finished, and neither one is going to, come out anytime soon as a, version 1 homebrew release. But the point is, the Neo Geo, as we said, was never supposed to run DOOM. And people are making it happen. And I think this is very, very interesting. And this is what I love about the homebrew community. When there is a challenge thrown down, which is something that I did in my first video. There are always going to be people out there that try to get the job done. So who knows? Look, it's only been 5 weeks since I made that video, 5 or 6 weeks ago, and we're already at this point. So a big thank you to Frankel S for Doom 64KB and the whole 64KB rendering effort, as well as Retroports for the Doom NG V-Sliced renderer. I will leave links to both of them in the description below. Go ahead and start the repos and take a look if you've got some interesting patches that you think you can apply. So this is definitely an interesting story, and I'm going to continue to cover it as we go along, but I do hope you enjoyed this look at these new updates to running Doom on the Neo Geo. Both of these show promise in different ways, and who knows, we may end up getting Doom on the Neo Geo after all. Thank you so much for watching, guys. If you liked this episode, please don't forget to leave me a thumbs up, and we will catch you guys in the next episode. Bye for now.